Varmt välkomna allesammans till Svenska kyrkans montern och Se människan-scenen. Vi har nu kommit fram till dagens seminarium som även denna dag har fokus på Sydafrika. Och rubriken är Ett land i förändring. Och här på scen så säger vi varmt välkommen till Frank Chikane, sydafrikansk statssekreterare, författare och pastor. Antje Jackelén, ärkebiskop. Och Karin Sarja, avdelningschef på kyrkokansliet. Och samtalet kommer, som ni förstår, föras på engelska. So welcome all of you.
Thank you. And you have now been introduced in Swedish, Reverend Frank Chikane and Archbishop Antje Jackelén. Most welcome to this conversation on the topic of being a country in change. And we are going to talk about the role of the church in the public sphere and in societal change. And it's a conversation about the future. Let's talk about the future. That was words that I heard before I went up to the stage. Yeah. In Sweden, as in many other countries, we receive more and more reports showing that youth lack hope for the future. And I can feel sympathy with that, looking at the world with war, famine, violence against women, climate crisis, injustice. So why not start there? Can you bring us and give us some words of hope and strength? How to act so that the world will be what God intended?
Yeah. That's very difficult to talk about the world. The world, there's nothing that is very exciting about what's happening now. I am quite convinced that we have got a leadership crisis in the world, and that's why it's easy to end up with the worst of things. But in South Africa, I thought I must use the example of South Africa. We always say we are a microcosm of what's happening in the world. So if you want to see anything that's happening in the world, you can go and find it in South Africa. The disparities of wealth, the inequalities, the challenges of poverty and extreme wealth. People who are extremely rich and live a high life of standard of living. The challenge we are facing now is how to develop a society where everybody has a stake. And I must say, I have hope, because without hope, you're dead. And we always called hope against hope. And the younger generation in South Africa gives me hope. You know, the youngest of my sons who is part of the Fees Must Fall generation gives me hope, because they've got a vision, they know what needs to be done, and he's saying to me, Dad, fix your mess so we can build the future, because the current problem, it's your problem, and we can build the future. So I've got hope that we can do that. The challenge is we started well in South Africa. We became like the love country of the world, you know, with Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and everybody else. But in the last 10 years, we had a dip that made us discover we're just like other human beings, and that we're going to require much more to change society and the way people think. And if you look at South Africa now and listen to the conversations, you know that there is hope beyond the hopelessness.
That's good to hear. And you, Antje, and Frank, you also quite later came back from the World Council of Churches, big gathering in Germany. What gave you hope there for the future, Antje?
Well, in a sense, a lot of things. I mean, you're talking about the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches, where more than 350 churches belong to the World Council of Churches, so it's really a global congregation in a sense.
Yes.
And what was so obvious during the days of the General Assembly was what held the whole thing together was the common worship. It was the singing, it was the praying, it was the listening to the words of the Bible. And we really moved in our singing from Fiji to Sweden and to Canada and to South Africa and to Colombia and to Costa Rica and to China, all in once, almost. It created a spirit of that we are a global communion, and we have been entrusted with the gift of hope. But to me, hope is both a gift, but it's also like a muscle. You have to receive it, but you have also got to train it. And the assembly, in a sense, was an expression of that. So on the basis of this singing together, coming together, we also were able to wrestle to find a common voice of the churches in burning issues of the day. Climate, just peace, not least in the Middle East, and questions of, I think that bothers the world right now, peace and war and all that. So that gives me also hope that there is a process. But then on the other hand, it's oftentimes easier to speak of what is the sort of enemy of hope or the attacks on hope. And when you said you're hopeful when you look at the young generation, it makes me happy. Because I'm sensing that our generation has not equipped the young generation in this country to really face the challenges that are ahead. And by challenges, I mean climate, I mean migration, I mean peace and war. And also, I mean, digitalization, which are all things that have a lot of ramifications and consequences. But we have left very much our young generation with a spiritual poverty. And spiritual poverty is an enemy to hope, because hope needs to be nurtured by a sense of a spirit of resilience and coexistence and this multifaceted thing that is hope.
Do you agree with Antje there? Can you feel that, the lack of spiritual hope among youth in South Africa?
Yeah, the context, of course, is different. But I mean, there is hope, because I take it from a spiritual perspective. Without hope, you're dead. That's my view, and that we always hoped against hope. We knew that apartheid is difficult. We knew that the apartheid system had nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, everything that they could use. But actually, we had hope against that. And I think that's what keeps us going. And when I use the young people in South Africa, there's a particular generation that's critical about the older generation. That's saying, we are where we are because of you. And they are saying that we had a Mandela's tutu, and we did well, but we are not in the situation where we are supposed to be, and we need to change. I don't have time to talk about that, but I am convinced that if we can deal with the challenge in South Africa, we can deal with the challenge of the world. If we can deal with the challenge of, that's why it's a microcosm. We can also deal with those challenges. So we need to be determined to produce a just society. That's what we need.
Can you give some examples of what's happening in South Africa now to build this just society with justice?
From a church perspective, there's a program that the Council of Churches agreed upon with the church leaders about how we can transform the society, deal with the issues of poverty and inequality, deal with the issues of reconciliation, deal with the issues of governance and corruption, and they've got a plan that has been designed to produce that effect, and then work with civil society and with government to be able to produce that. But we then discovered we're not at the same plane with the government, because the government was going the opposite direction in the last 10 years. And I must say that the churches in South Africa have taken a stand which has put a measurement on the government that says you are illegitimate morally if the resources of the country are misused. It means you've got a responsibility for the people of South Africa. If you are corrupted and corrupt the country, then you lose your legitimacy. And we've got a resolution like that. And we have said, unless you change, we cannot move from you being morally illegitimate. Now, many people said we are crazy in the world, but we have a resolution like that. So when I meet the president of South Africa, I say to him, by the way, we still have that resolution that says, because of corruption, capture of the state, you lose your morality to moral legitimacy. And so we need to change that. And changing means the government must serve the people and use the resources of the country to serve the people. In terms of vision, very clear. I mean, we committed to justice, we committed to clean energy, we are committed to equality, etc. It's how you do it and how you get there.
You are both leaders in churches, devoted your life to the churches, and you are both theologians, and you are taking a stand. But how do you handle the fact that there are those who doesn't want the church to take a stand, and those who would do nothing like that, but that? So how do you deal with both, and how do you act then as an archbishop or pastor with the call to unity in this societal change?
Yeah, you're addressing and you were exemplifying the role of the church in the public space. And I think that is a very important question also in the Swedish context. And again, I think the global church, the global communion of churches is very important in that respect. And now I'm referring to the Lutheran World Federation, which is a communion of about 140 Lutheran churches throughout the world, and they put out some years ago a study document with the title The Church in the Public Space. It's actually available online, even in Swedish, and it says very clearly there is a sound theological grounding for churches in general, and maybe for Lutheran churches in general, in particular, to think carefully and clearly about the role of the church in the public space, because the church has a role there, otherwise it can never be salt and light in the world. And how could that role be? And this study document suggests an A, B, C, D, E of the church engagement in the public space, and the A would be assessing public issues in participatory ways. It was assessing and doing it in dialogue with others. And the B would be building relationships of trust. And the C would be challenging injustice. And the D would be, where we started, discovering signs of hope. And the E would be empowering people in need. And I think we can never have lesser than that. Now, the issue of the church in the public space is, of course, sometimes a controversial one, because the powers that you challenge on the basis of the gospel, of course, will react, and they will tell you that you are political,
Yeah.
but in fact, they are political. And of course, political means to be an actor in the public space. And that is part of the nature of the church. So in certain situations, like the one we are facing in Sweden, we need to be careful about not having ourselves be silenced, being said, you are not the church if you speak out or if you adhere to this A, B, C, D, E of what the church should be doing in the public space. And then, of course, you were mentioning the issue of unity. Of course, it's a very, from the side of the person or the power who wants to silence you, it's a strong argument saying, if you speak out, you're not speaking for everybody, and you are disuniting the community you are supposed to represent. And of course, that's very serious, because you're dressed as church leaders. As a church leader, you want to serve your community, and you want to keep it together as much as is possible. So you want to fight off the disunity. So that argument is very serious, and it's a rather sharp weapon. But I would say there is no, if we're wanting to be followers of Jesus, there is no way we cannot take responsibility as the church in the public space. And the example of the church in South Africa and in many other places around the world shows us that churches have done that, do that, and play an important role for freedom, for justice, for peace. And we need to continue that legacy. And we are not, the Church of Sweden is really not at the forefront there.
No.
We have a lot to learn from the South African context, among others.
What would you like us to learn from you?
Well, we learn from each other. But let me just say, this is it was a very interesting issue when we did this resolution on moral legitimacy. The comrades who are now in leadership, because we were with them together, would say, no, but the church is becoming political now. So I thought, now you're talking like the apartheid system. That's what they used to say to the churches. And my argument is the fact that you join a political party and stand for elections doesn't make you a political scientist. So not all politicians are political scientists. And therefore, we are together in this matter. Politics, for me, it's about how you construct society and how people live. It's different from party politics. And so in South Africa at the present moment, the good thing is that firstly, apartheid united us. When you are in the trenches together, you forget about your differences and come together. Secondly, that even those who opposed us during the apartheid days now support us in changing society. By the way, there's nobody now in South Africa who ever supported apartheid. You won't find them. They all never supported apartheid. They are working together to solve the challenges. And so in terms of agreement, we have a consensus. The challenge is how you go about changing society. I think that's the critical issue that we are facing at the present moment, and how you work with government and civil society to achieve the objectives that you've set up. You can go to Google and find civil society manifesto in South Africa, where we, together with civil society, the churches, agreed on the type of South Africa we want and how we should get it, but the challenge is to make it happen.
Yeah. How can you learn from each other? You said, Antje, that we have a lot to learn from South Africa, and you, Frank, said we can learn from each other. So if you can give an example of this is what I would really give to Sweden, and what would you like to give to South Africa?
If I could start out, I say South Africa is a microcosm, so we can't solve the problem of South Africa without the solution of the world. It's impossible. The economic issues are interrelated, the political issues are interrelated, and so the way in which we collaborate as one body, if I have to use a religious language, one body of Christ, it would make it easier for us to deal with the issues. Because what you are dealing with here, it's related to what we are dealing with in South Africa and vice versa.
And what would you?
Personally, I learned, of course, from the example of Desmond Tutu. That was so inspiring, not least when I was sitting here with him and his daughter Mpo. But also from my colleague, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, his courage to address things, and the conversation with him has been very helpful to me, not to lose courage myself, and not to, when you need to relate to people and contexts outside your own, not to lose perspective. If you are told 1,000 times in your own context that something that you think is wrong is right, at the end you fail to be motivated and to have the courage to speak out. But if you can relate to other contexts, that is also an affirmation, and that you need to have patience and to have perseverance, because things will change, even if they seem hopeless at the moment. I mean, the history of South Africa shows us that change can happen, will happen, but that even change is not a one-direction history, that there are always new complexities open up. And that is exactly why you need a spirituality of resilience, of coexistence, and of hope. And that brings me back to the why we let down a young generation if we don't offer them those resources, those spiritual resources.
But you are taking a stand, and you have also met resistance then, I guess. Of course we know that. And can you tell us about the resistance you have met, and how have you found hope when there has been those dark days when you have received resistance for you taking a stand? Where do you find your hope?
Yeah, can I just say that the resistance that you get in our context, it's more about the how rather than whether we should do it. And once you talk about the how, you've got differences. The church likes making statements and condemning, but when you say, let's act now and make a difference, then you've got resistance. Yeah. But it's not only that, it's the fact that the church has got latent energy and power. And I'm using the power deliberately in terms of authority and influence. If you take our numbers in South Africa with the SACC 20 million members, we could change that society. But churches are not able to translate the statement, if you are an Anglican, to members of the Anglican Church on the ground. I think that's where the challenge is, and we need to discover the authority and the latent energy. I think that's the best way to speak about it, which if we get the members of the churches act in a particular way, we could change society.
We could change society. Thank you for that. And Antje, when you have had dark moments because you have taken a stand and you have sort of given us hope, what gives you hope then?
Well, in the end, of course, it is falling back on baptism. I mean, I was given hope. I was touched by the love of God before I could choose myself, and that is really wonderful. So going back to that and realizing that hope also is a gift, and it's there even when I don't feel it. At the same time, doing my best to exercise that hope muscle within myself by exercising empathy, by listening to the stories both of suffering but also of resilience, resistance, and overcoming suffering, and by experiencing communion, both communion and community, I would say.
Thank you. And we will soon end this conversation. What is the word that you would like to send us with when we are going out and face the political landscape we have, the challenges? We have discussed it, but some words that will give us each other some energy to wake up tomorrow and say, we can change this, and there is hope and future for the youth who doesn't always feel that.
Yeah, for me, we need to realize that none of us can do it alone. Whether in South Africa, Sweden, or anywhere else, we need to realize we need each other. We need to work with each other. We need to collaborate in our actions to be able to cause the change that is required. And if you take the international dimension part of it, we don't have time to talk about that. You realize that the world, actually, it's very dishonest. You know what I'm talking about? If for us as South Africans, for instance, if you take the issue of the world saying Ukraine must have the freedom to make its choices, but Congress in the United States says we are passing a bill to tell Africans who to support and who not to support, and we're going to punish them. You know what I mean? You have the world fighting for freedom, but the definition of freedom doesn't exclude us, doesn't include us. We can lose our freedom and others must have their freedom. We belong to each other. You can't have one side of the world think in this way and another. We need to think together, care about each other. In fact, my best expression is, do unto others as you would they do to you. And that's the only way in which we can have a just society.
As simple as that. Yeah. And still it's difficult. And some words that gives us more hope to go up tomorrow and fight.
Well, I was earlier today in a conversation about the freedom of speech. And after that, somebody said to me, you're an idealist. And it was not meant as a compliment. You're an idealist. And I said, yes, I am, but I'm also a realist. And I think that is the strength that you gain from faith, that you have the ideas, you know how it should be. You have this vision of the reign of God, and you want to participate in building it. And at the same time, you know the suffering, you know about what we call sin, you know about the failure, the vulnerability. And that makes me think still that hope has these three components, that a hope to be trustworthy, and some of you have heard me say that before, a hope that is trustworthy can harbor anger and frustration and suffering. But it also has this sense of realism or humility, you can say as well, because it can accept both our power, our strength, our creativity, and our imperfectness, our finitude, our weakness, our mortality. And in that, it has the energy to choose the path of courage. Because in most situations, we still can make choices, and often we can choose a more courageous path rather than the other one. And I think that is hope in action and hope in practice.
Thank you, Reverend Frank Chicano and Archbishop Antti Akilén, and thank you for words of hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.